Good morning and welcome back to the channel. Today I want to do a quick review, a 3-2-1 review of Max Lucado's new book, Unshakable Hope. So it's going to be 3 things I really enjoyed or appreciated about the book, 2 things I think could be improved, and 1 actionable takeaway we can use from Lucado's new book. So this is probably the first Lucado book that I have read in its entirety. Obviously, he's a gigantic influence in the Christian sphere, so I've encountered his work in many different times, but this is the first time I picked up his book and sat down and read it cover to cover, and I can see what the draw is to him as a writer, as a communicator, as a preacher. He has a lot of things he does right, a lot of things he does differently than I do, obviously, because we're separated by a couple of generations. But yeah, here's my take on it, and I hope it's useful to you in deciding whether or not to pick up the book, or perhaps if you've already read it, maybe this will help you digest through a few of the things in there. So first, one of the 3 things I really enjoyed about it. So first, he has great personal stories. Max Lucado has built a really impressive church and community and influence in the American Christian story. And so because of that, he has had the opportunity to work with and talk to and have these adventures with other important people in the Christian sphere, but also just in the world, in the sports arena, in the political arena, and so on. So the stories he shares with us are pretty incredible. You know, swimming next to Olympic people, playing basketball with former NBA champions. The stories are really interesting and very engaging, and he uses them well to deliver the points. The second thing is that, coupled with that, obviously he knows what he's talking about because he has good biblical evidence throughout the book. He uses scripture in a mature, disciplined way. He knows how to incorporate it to the stories. He knows how to take the promise, because the subtitle of the book is, let me make sure I read it right, Building Our Lives on the Promises of God. He knows how to accentuate what those are and simplify them out in the stories he is telling. So I appreciate that. He can tell his own stories well, he can tell the biblical story well, and my third thing that I really like is that I felt like the book is cohesive. One thing that is a pet peeve of mine is when I feel like a book is more like an anthology than a cohesive thought. Because I love anthologies, but if that's what it's going to be, then tell me that's what it is. When people think that I can just have 12 or 20 random thoughts, string them together, and that's a book, that's not what that is. But he's very intentional about how and why he writes what he writes, so that from beginning to end you feel like he's taking you somewhere, and by the end of it you feel like, hey, I've reached that point that he said he was going to take me to. So I really appreciate mostly him as a writer and how he's able to incorporate these things. 2 things I think he could do better, for me personally, and they're kind of interrelated. So there's not really anything brand new in the book, and it's hard not to see some of what he says as Christianese. That's just kind of, in the culture he's in, I guess. He is, the tradition he's from, he's later in life, and so that's the expectation that is made around that aura, around his community, and so on. The words he uses, the phrases he uses, the stories he tells, they're all very familiar for one way or another. Part of that is good because it makes him very accessible as a writer. It makes his biblical theology very accessible. You know where he's going to go. You know how he stands at every point. But maybe the downside or the less than part of that is that it's not so much of an adventure of discovery. If you read what the promise is at the beginning of the chapter, you know exactly what he's going to say about it. If you've read more than a dozen Christian books in your lifetime, you've heard some things over and over again. This book doesn't present anything new. It just presents the same things in different ways, with fun stories to read and good biblical promises to remind yourselves on. But as a testament to here's a new way or a better way or a deeper way of looking at it, that's not what this book does. I don't even think that's what this book aimed to do. It's more of he knows the target audience. they know what they expect from him, and so it's just a really good union of that. So me coming as an outsider, being one of the first books of his I've read cover to cover, that's just my take on it. Now the one actionable takeaway from his book is, and I think he does a good job of hammering this away too, is just Christians need to do a better job of exposing ourselves to the promises God has for us. There's mountains of promise just laid out for us in Scripture, but part of the reason we are not walking them, we're not acting like they exist, is because we're just not aware of what they are. And so what Max Lucado does very well through his book is bring them up again and again. I can't remember how many promises he covers, probably around 10 to 12, and just trying to highlight them and make them actionable and practical, to say, this is a promise that is already yours. Here's how you can start feeling like it's real or acting like it's real. So one thing we all as Christians need to do is just expose ourselves to it. And a book like Max Lucado's does accomplish that. It does give us room, I guess. If we pick up the book, get the audiobook, it gives us a dedicated amount of space or time or hearing to make room for the promises of God to speak into our lives. Overall, I would recommend the book. It's hard for me not to recommend a book. It had to be pretty destructive, because I think people get different things because they're coming from different places when they approach the same book as I approach it. So I do recommend it. I recommend it not so much because you're going to learn something new, but mostly because you're going to be reminded of something important. And I think that's a good way to summarize a lot of what Max Lucado does and why he's so effective in his ministry, and how we can be more effective in our lives. Is not always chasing the new, but reminding ourselves of the important. And in this specific case, that being the promises of God that he has already laid out for us. So thank you for taking a few minutes to watch this review. If you have already read the book or thinking about it, go ahead and leave a comment down below so I can kind of hear where you're at in the process, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about the book down there. All right, thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon.